Welcome to Creative Piecemeal. I'm Tammy Takaishi, a board-certified music therapist. Join me each week as a new guest from across the fine and creative arts spheres shares struggles, triumphs, laughs, words of wisdom, and more in authentic, thought-provoking, and inspiring interviews. Hello, and welcome to Creative Piecemeal. Today, I am joined by Joe Battaglia. He is a seasoned and award-winning journalist who spent years in the Olympics arena. With over 2 decades in sports media, he's led content creation across news, politics, and athletics, including a role on the NBCOlympics.com team that earned a Sports Emmys for outstanding new approaches to sports event coverage for the 2008 Beijing and 2012 London Summer Olympics. He is also an author, and the award-winning children's book, The ABCs of Track and Field, A Fast Start for Future Runners, Jumpers, and Throwers, and his debut adult novel, which is called Beneath the Rings, and it is a suspense thriller about the Olympics in, was it 2040, is that correct?
Yes.
So, Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm excited to talk about all sorts of things, not only your inspiration for your book, but also regarding your career as a journalist and broadcaster. But before we get to that, origin story, how, who, what brought you to the career that you had, and then what inspired you to pivot to writing?
Yeah, I was always a creative writer from when I was at a very young age. Kind of recently, my mom dug out an old short story that I had written when I was 10 years old about the mob infiltrating the Vatican. Those kind of crazy ideas were always running through my head, I would think. But when I was in high school, I won 2 writing scholarships, and one of them got me an introduction to the folks that ran the high school sports department at the Newark Star Ledger newspaper. And they invited me to come take a tour of the office one night and offered me a part-time job. And I took that job because it was a foot in the door, and I was like, "Hey, I can learn on the fly." That happened in my freshman year of college. I was only 18 years old, and I wound up spending 13 years working there. Became a full-time writer. I got some beats for girls volleyball and swimming that I covered the entire state doing that. And so I learned the sports journalism on the fly. We had 8, 9 different editions every day. So, it was writing on deadline, going out to cover an event, but potentially coming back with not just one story, 8 stories. So you have different tops to those articles for the different, geographic zones that the paper was going to. It got the opportunity to write features and profiles and do a lot of them and, sort of, cut teeth creatively there. So, and then also learn from editors that had been working in the newspaper business since before I was born. So it was a really great experience. It wasn't until I recognized that the newspaper industry was struggling and was going to struggle with figuring out how to monetize the onset of digital that I made a career switch and wound up at NBCOlympics.com.
Nice. And your book, of course, focusing on the Olympics in the future, and it is a suspense thriller. Obviously, having Olympic experience probably played into inspiration and writing that. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, I knew when I set out to write Beneath the Rings that I wanted it set in the Olympic world. I didn't want it set too far in the future where it became like a dystopian type story, or things like a cell phone would be unrecognizable. I also didn't want to write historical fiction, so I decided to set it in 2440 and in Doha because I had the opportunity to go to Doha on 3 occasions for track and field events and sort of fell in love with the city. And it's, glitz and glamorous, new facilities and downtown and, set against, the ancient part of town, with its, ages old souk market and dhow boats down on the water, and it was just it seemed like the perfect setting. And Doha is very active in bidding for international sporting events. They've had the World Cup already. There's nothing to say that an Olympics won't be there in 2040 or somewhere around there. So I wanted to make it realistic, and so I knew that was my setting. And then in terms of the story, it just sort of came. I knew that I wanted to harken back a little bit to the 1972 Munich massacre, and so I chose a kidnapping, and I also knew that I wanted the protagonist to be a journalist and a strong female journalist, and so from there, like that's where it started, and started piecing it together little by little.
What did you find was one of the most surprising things about writing your book?
I got to a point, maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 chapters in, where I realized that I needed to flesh out some of the backstory behind the bad guys. And I didn't, I'm not a historian by nature. What I do know, I had to research and read up on. So I actually, put the writing down for a while and actually started researching Middle Eastern conflicts and some of the fallout of those, and tried to figure out both stylistically and timeline wise how I could link some of my characters back to these real conflicts, and show how they became disenfranchised and on the path, their current path of wreaking havoc on these Olympic Games.
What was something that you learned from writing your children's book that you applied to writing your adult book?
The children's book was literally a boredom project. I had just gotten laid off from my job of 10 years, and I was sitting in my office wondering, like, what am I going to do with all this time I have on my hands? And I've got a picture of my daughter sitting on my desk, and I recalled, when she was learning to read, that she didn't have an alphabet book that was track and field themed. And so I set out to put something like that together. I kind of looked all over Amazon. Does something like this exist? And I missed it as a dad, or what? And when I didn't find one, I said, okay, well, let's write out the letters A through Z, and let's start linking them to some of the greatest athletes in the world. And let's make sure it's balanced between women and men, and runners and throwers, and Americans and international athletes. And then from there, I was able to, start sitting down and, okay, let's write 2 sentences about this athlete that rhyme. Before too long, I had that book, and I self-published it and did not sell a lot of copies, and that's okay. It was just, for me, the bringing of that book to the world gave me the confidence that I could use the rest of my time to do something a little bit more meaty. And the my parents had begged me my entire life to write a book, and that's a very difficult thing to do when you're on the road, traveling and chasing professional athletes around the globe. And so I decided that, yeah, now's the time. And so yeah, I sat down and started doing Beneath the Rings.
Nice. Pivoting back to your career as a journalist, what are some things that you loved and things that you carry through into this career that you have now as a writer?
I love storytelling. I mean, that was always my favorite thing to do. If I had the opportunity to just, even when I was working at the newspaper, if I had the opportunity to, like, not write a game story and could write a feature every single day or multiple features a day, I would take that over anything. I always gravitated to that. I liked unearthing, some things that people don't know about the athletes, that they're watching, and putting that on paper. So that was my favorite thing. And I think through that, I've also built some really, really great relationships that I cherish to this day. Athletes, I mean, the very first event that I covered and got my byline in the Newark Star Ledger was a cross country meet at the Essex County Championships, which was held in Branchbrook Park, and I lived across the street from the park. I walked over there and covered that event, and the girls' race was won by Hazel Clark of Columbia High School. And if you don't know much about Hazel, her father, Joe Clark, was the inspiration behind the movie Lean on Me, and got to know that family very well. I got to be really close friends with Hazel. I followed her running career to the University of Florida, and then I had the pleasure of doing so again on the Olympic team. And we're friends to this day. 30 some odd years later. Those things don't just happen, right? And I think that's special.
What's one of your favorite parts about the creative process, and how is that shift from when you do journalism to when you do fiction?
My favorite part of the creative process is actually the brainstorming and seeing where a story leads you. Journalism, you don't necessarily have that as much control over the parameters, right? You're researching things that people actually said and actually did, and you're kind of bound by those guidelines. When you're writing fiction, like there are no boundaries, right? Like you're setting those guidelines, and it's quite different. It's a different kind of writing. Yes, it's still putting words on paper, but the approach is two they're two totally different things. And I really enjoyed the fiction part of it. So that was like really the first time that putting together Beneath the Rings, that I've had the opportunity to kind of stretch my writing wings a little bit in that way. It was fun. I gotta admit.
Yeah, I can imagine it. It's quite the departure, and you get to really explore all sorts of facets of making up a world, making up characters, and it definitely tickles a different part of the brain, you know?
Oh yeah, absolutely. When I was setting out, like as an example, to build out my main character, Nova Mendelsohn, right? I had ideas of like who I wanted that to be, right? I've got a great friend, Alan Abrahamson, who's in Milan right now covering the Winter Olympics as he always does, and he's an independent journalist. And I wanted an Alan type, but I didn't want it to be Alan because I didn't want people to just read the book and say, "Oh, that's just Alan," right? I wanted to also take different pieces of other people and kind of build them into Nova. I wanted her to be gritty and be able to draw from personal loss like Lara Logan. I wanted her to have the tenacity of some historical figures like Nellie Bly and Ida Tarbell. I wanted her to have trailblazing type characteristics of folks like Helene Elliott from the LA Times and Leslie Visser. So, like being able to take bits and pieces of all those people and create this new person, right, was a lot of fun.
What was something that you found yourself struggling with either in your journalism field or in your creative writing field, and how did you overcome it?
The very first draft of Beneath the Rings was probably not suitable for publication. It was not good. And I had the again, you talk about relationships. I had the benefit of knowing Sarah Crouch, who's the USA Today bestseller with Middle Tide, and just put out another book that's a hit called The Briars. And I knew Sarah from her running days, competing in the marathons and stuff. And I just reached out to her to pick her brain about just the whole book publishing process. And she was kind enough to, offer to read my manuscript. And so I sent it to her. And, while she had some really good words to say about just my writing, she pointed out correctly that I had completely botched my opening chapter, and like it was way too long, and like there was no flow there. And I, in the middle of the story was starting to be a little bit too visceral with some of the details on the bad guys and like what they were doing to these athletes. And she's like, "Look, you got to decide what you want this book to be. Is it a thriller because there's an audience for that, or is it gore because there's an audience for that too? Like you're mixing things up." And without that advice, this book would not be what it is today. I 100% give her credit for pointing out those errors and sending me to rewrite. Like, without that, and I'm eternally grateful for that feedback.
It's always good to have writing buddies because you just never know. You know, you get deep into the woods of your book, and you can sort of like lose sight of things, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And I was kind of eager to get eyeballs on the book. Writing can be particularly something as long as a novel can be a very lonely experience, right? Like my wife is not a writer, she's not a reader, right? She'll pick up a book and read 2 pages and fall asleep. I couldn't draw her into my process, to give me creative criticism and help, right? Like the only eyeballs on this entire project for the longest time were mine. And so Sarah, being able to give it a look, and then, finally then getting it to, the editing process, both, dev editing and then line editing, like, was really beneficial. And I loved every second of it.
What is a piece of advice that you would give to people wanting to go into either career that you've stepped into?
Journalism, it's tough. I mean, it's tough out there. I mean, I'm just being frank, honest. Getting jobs and paying jobs in journalism is really hard these days. And if my daughter came to me, and thankfully she's only 7, and she won't yet, but told me that she wanted to do what I do, I would say no, do something else. But relative to just creative writing, I feel like there's a lot of stuff out there where people say, make sure you outline everything, or make sure that, if you're writing and you're writing serious, you need to get down 5,000 words a day or something, some word count. And like, I don't buy into any of that. I did not write an outline for Beneath the Rings. I took it chapter by chapter and let what was coming out of my brain lead me down the next path. And I did not write 5,000 words a day or 2,000 words a day. Some days it was 100 words. Some days it was more. Like, I was more interested in quality over quantity. And I think that's a really smart approach. But like, I wouldn't feel necessitated to approach a project, with, the boundaries that somebody else wants to put on you. Like, I would approach them uniquely and find what's best for you. If an outline is how you work best, great, go for it. But like, don't feel pressured to like stay within, these confinements that like people put out there sometimes, because sometimes it's more restricting than allowing creative flow.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree. It really is up to the person figuring out what works for them, what process. And, it's different for everyone. And it's almost like there's no hard and fast rules. There's advice, there's general advice, there's things where it's like, oh, this would be a good thing for people to follow if they operate like XYZ. That makes sense. But, it's still up to each person to tailor it their way. And sometimes it's a process in and of its own to figure that out. Like, I went through a period where I thought, oh, because I have a friend who's very successful author and they outline and they get books done in a very timely manner, then I too must outline. And then I realized, like, nope, nope, it just doesn't work for me.
Yeah, yeah, and that's fine. Like you said, there is no right or wrong. You do you.
What was one of your favorite things about your career field as a journalist and one of your proudest moments?
My favorite thing by far about my career is the relationships. Again, being able to, call up Sarah Crouch out of the blue, right? Like, when I hadn't talked to her in years, and, be able to, talk about writing, or some of the relationships I've built with athletes like Med Keflezighi and his family, watching him win an Olympic medal, watch him win the New York City Marathon, the Boston Marathon, being able to, years after, watching her compete, be able to write, the career story of Blanka Vlasic, who is great Olympic high jumper from Croatia, and, have her really pour out, a lot of stuff to me that she had never told anybody before, and trust me with that. Those are the things that I cherish more. I mean, I've got 2 Emmys sitting behind me right now, and those are cool. And when people come over and have never seen an Emmy and they want to, pick them up and gaze at them like that's fun. But the best part is just like all the memories of those people that I've interacted with over the years and did right by that, like, still pick up the phone when I call them today.
It's really nice. Yeah. The human aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, again, beyond the X's and O's, just the human aspect of it.
I completely get that. Even though I'm not a journalist, I'm a podcaster, and that's one of the things I love the most about podcasting is getting to know people from all over the world, different walks of life, different careers, and some of them have become dear friends. It's just fabulous. It's just a wonderful way to enrich one's life, and sometimes unexpectedly.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you could be in the Olympics yourself, what would you like to compete in?
Oh gosh, I was a terrible athlete. Um, uh, what would I like to do in the as an Olympic sport? Yeah, I'd probably want a pole vault.
Ooh, nice.
There's something about the pole vault that's just is everything that I'm not. I'm not big, strong, fast, daredevil, wanting to soar over, bars 18, 19, 20 feet, in the air. Those are all things I am not. So I guess if I was going to live out an athletic fantasy, I'd want to be, strong enough to, sprint down a runway with this big, heavy fiberglass pole and then vault myself to into the heavens. So I'm gonna go with pole vault there for the win.
Nice, nice. It always looked really interesting from like a tactile standpoint and like a feedback standpoint of having like the pole vibrating in your arms as you're in your hands as you're like whipping over it and then flying for like a few seconds. I always thought that seemed so cool.
Yeah, it's no joke. It's not easy by any stretch. So I've been up close and personal with a bunch of pole vaulters. I've been at competitions and watched poles snap while people are in midair.
Oh,
It's crazy.
I always wonder how people like think up events and games like that. Like who thought of the first idea like let's get a pole and run and jump over this other pole?
These are all, I mean, a lot of the track and field events are all like rooted in military, ancient military. Like, I mean, why would you pole vault? You're trying to get over a wall somewhere, right? Like the hammer throw it's a weapon. The javelin is a weapon. The shot put, it's a weapon. Like, there's a lot of military sort of basis to a lot of the different events in track and field.
I never knew that. Back to your book, what was one of your favorite parts to write?
The ending was one of my favorite parts. It sort of dealt with physical frailty, mental frailty, so just emotional trauma. How two people basically came together and like pulled each other out of it. After everything that goes down in the book, I wanted a happy ending, but I wasn't sure how I was going to get there. And as I was writing it, it just felt right. It felt like Nova got the ending that she deserved. I was really happy with that.
Excellent. Speaking of writing, who are some authors who inspire you?
Stephen King is my guy. Inevitably, if you're asking me what I'm reading or listening to audiobook form, it's usually Stephen King. I have this hobby of getting up early on the weekends and going fishing and putting an audiobook on at 4 o'clock in the morning and sitting at the Central Lake, Central Pond, here in College Station, Texas, and in the dark, fishing, and somewhere in my subliminal conscious, hoping somebody doesn't jump out of the bushes and knife me in the back, like while I'm listening to Stephen King. Um, but Stephen King's my go-to. Growing up, my favorite book to read was Dracula, so I'm going to put Bram Stoker on the list as well. But if you ask me who I've read the most, it's probably Stephen King.
Dracula is excellent. I haven't read much of Stephen King, to be honest, but I loved his book on writing. Have you read that one?
I have read that one, and I did thoroughly enjoy it. And he's another guy that doesn't outline, so I felt vindicated. Um, Yeah, he's fantastic, and I like that all of his books are not horror that like he's become known for, right? He's got such a varied catalog. People should probably pay attention to. I think one of his I'm trying to remember the title of it. Sneaky good book. It's called Fairy Tale, actually. I would highly recommend folks pick up Fairy Tale. And it starts in a way that you feel like is going classic Stephen King, and it goes way off the Stephen King rails. Even for Stephen King. So it's kind of full of surprises. So Fairy Tale would be my recommendation.
Stephen King out Stephen Kinged himself.
Yeah, he did. He did. For me, he did. In this one, I was where that book was started and where it started going and like where it ended was not A plus B plus C equals D. Like, I don't know what the equation would be, but it was way different.
Nice. Yeah, he's so talented, so talented.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had one iota of his talent. I mean, it would be amazing.
In your writing journey, what are you looking forward to next?
I'm looking forward to seeing if we can get Beneath the Rings on the big screen. Can I help work on a screen adaptation of Beneath the Rings? I think would be a dream project. The way Beneath the Rings ends is open to a sequel, so I haven't ruled that out either. But I haven't 100% decided if I want to go down that avenue or just start fresh on on another idea. I don't have that other idea yet, so it's all wide open. But I think those are the two. I definitely want to write another book. I want to see Beneath the Rings through to its max potential.
Nice. Jumping away from writing, just ask a you question. What is something you wish you'd known when you first started in your career?
Early in my writing career, I thought I was a hot shot. I thought I knew better than my editors sometimes, and I probably should have shut up and listened more than I actually spoke. Because looking back on it now, they were all right, and I wasn't. So yeah, I wish I was a little less arrogant. My editors knew and had. I mean, they had been there, done that, seen that. Maybe it was, maybe not in my specific sport, but their knowledge transferred, and I wasn't seeing that. My ego wasn't allowing me to see that. I was putting up blinders and, had me thinking I was better than them, and I wasn't. And I wish I could go back and check that ego at the door and maybe be a little more reverent, in some of those situations.
I appreciate you sharing something so honest and raw.
Yeah, that was the question. That was the answer.
Yeah, no, that's great though. What is something on your bucket list that you have recently crossed off?
I mean, writing this book is probably the most recent thing that I've crossed off my bucket list, to be honest. Yeah, I haven't had any other crazy bucket list opportunities come my way. This one has been on the bucket list for a long time, like since I was a teenager. Like my parents, I swear to God, have begged me for years and years and years and years to write a book. I'm glad I finally got around to it before they passed, and they can actually read it. That's Beneath the Rings is a bucket list item.
In terms of the book, what do you hope readers will take away?
What I want the readers to take away is I hope they finish Beneath the Rings with a deeper appreciation for the Olympics and the Olympics' unfiltered soul, the magic of human achievement mixed with, the gritty realities of politics, ethics, global tensions, all these things that I've gotten the opportunity to witness firsthand. Beyond the thrill of conspiracy and chase, I want them to reflect on how sport can expose truths and bridge divides and inspire resilience. Those are things that I feel like are in the real Olympic Games and things that helped shape this story. And so I guess those would be the things I want them to take away.
What is one of your favorite memories from covering the Olympics over the years?
I mean, I've seen all of Usain Bolt's world records in person, both. So he broke his first one in New York City before the Beijing Olympics in 2008 on a rainy night. and Memorial Day weekend. Saw that. Saw obviously the three records he broke in Beijing, and then the following summer at the World Championships in 2009 in Berlin, he set those marks again in the 100 and the 200, 958 in 1919, and those records have not been broken, and I don't know that they will be for quite some time. So those were the favorite things that I've seen with my eyes. If you're asking me what is one of the favorite stories I got to tell out of being in and around the Olympic world so long, I would say that would be Bob Beeman's story, and not just Bob Beeman, setting the Olympic record in the long jump, in Mexico City in 1968, but what he went through before he got there and his fight for civil rights and how it cost him his scholarship and place at University of Texas El Paso, and how he managed to piece together his training and everything, bridging the gap of his expulsion from the team to the Olympic trials and then ultimately the Olympics. People talk a lot about John Carlos and Tommy Smith and the raising their fist salute from 1968, being the prominent civil rights moment of those Olympics. Few people know what Bob Beamon went through, and so having the opportunity to put that story together in a short documentary was also a highlight for me.
Fantastic. Joe, thank you for being on the show. One more question for you before we wrap up, and that's, in your own words, what does living a creative life mean to you?
Living a creative life means channeling whatever your creativity is and bringing it into the world. There are so many creative people, whether they're writers, painters, musicians. You can be a creative parent. You can be creative, in a line job, and have different ideas. To me, living that life is freely and willingly bringing that to fruition and bringing it to the open.
Excellent. Joe, thank you again for being on the show. Your debut adult novel, Beneath the Rings, out from Franklin Publishers. You also have your children's book, The ABCs of Track and Field. So again, thank you for being on the show. Listeners, please check the show notes for links on where to purchase and to learn more about Joe. And of course, website links will be there. And as always, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Creative Piecemeal. We hope today's episode left you feeling inspired. This podcast is independently created and produced by the host, Tammy Takaishi. More details about today's guest can be found in the show notes, along with links to the podcast's socials, merch store, and ways to support arts organizations AHA Broadway and New Normal Rep, both near and dear to Tammy's heart. Don't forget to visit creativepiecemeal.com, the official podcast website, where you can leave fan mail, write a review, explore Tammy's blog, and discover the growing collection of episodes. Special thanks to our audio engineer, Alex Rapetti. Additional narration by Dante Jace. Let's keep celebrating creativity in all its forms.